Yo, what's happening, guys? How the heck are you doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review. And today we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of these future consoles and what they mean for the generations. So the gist of the conversation that I wanted to have with you guys today revolves around the upcoming Nintendo Switch, the big hot thing that we're all talking about and all excited for, and also the fact that we know by the end of the year next year, unless this changes, Microsoft is also planning on releasing their Xbox Project Scorpio. So what does it really mean that both Nintendo and Microsoft are releasing brand new consoles next year, only a couple of months after Sony has just released their PlayStation 4 Pro? Well, what I'm trying to do is figure out if once Nintendo releases their Switch and then Microsoft releases their Scorpio, are we going to be in this weird situation where those two companies might have sort of accidentally started the ninth generation? It's a really good question, I think, and it's had my head spinning these last couple of days as I started to really try to put these pieces together with what's going on with this current generation, the 8th generation, which initially consisted of the Wii U, the PlayStation 4, and the Xbox One. We've now had an upgraded version of what is still the PlayStation 4, but with Nintendo and Microsoft having brand new consoles, maybe with Microsoft, that's kind of the gray area, all of a sudden we have to start to wonder, are we going to sort of be in the ninth generation? Are we going to still be in the 8th generation? Are they going to be continuations more on Microsoft's side of what they've already been doing? It's a really interesting question. What generation will be happening once both of those machines are out? And I've got to be really honest with you guys and tell you that I honestly have no freaking clue. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Rob, well, if you have no clue, why would you have decided to even make a video talking about this topic? And you're right, it kind of seems ridiculous, but you know what? I just love talking about video games, man. And honestly, I think you guys love hearing me talk about video games. Don't play coy. You know you love it. That's why you're here. So I figured, hey, it's a good question. I have a couple of pieces of insight I think I can add to the conversation, and I just sort of wanted to dissect it, you know, with you guys and kind of talk to you guys about it and see what you guys think once I present my case and sort of get into the nitty-gritty of what it all could mean. So, coming back to the main topic at hand, will the Nintendo Switch and the Xbox Scorpio officially be the beginning of the ninth generation? So like I said, I don't really know, and there's a couple of reasons why it's hard to officially completely answer that. But let's start off with the easy part first. The Nintendo Switch. That's going to be a ninth generation console. I mean, there's really no other way to look at that, right? The Wii U, Nintendo's last console, was officially their 8th generation console, releasing in 2012. Its life, I mean, will officially end next year in 2017, but in the same respect, Nintendo's kind of already confirmed that they're no longer producing more Wii U's. So there's a weird thing going on there, but we are going to get Zelda released on the Wii U next year, so we'll still be getting a title. It's like the life of the Wii U will either be tracked into 2016 or more than likely 2017. So 4 or 5 years, that's the life of the Wii U. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, released in 2013, is still going as of this day for who knows how long. That's the 8th generation. So the Nintendo Switch will be replacing the Wii U and will be 100% completely brand freaking new. And, you know, for all of the reasons that we already know. It's going to be more powerful. It's using a combined actual portable machine with a home console dock, and it's going to be using different controllers. It's going to have probably a different OS, completely brand new library, maybe a couple of ports, but I mean, it's the next generation of what Nintendo's been creating with their hardware. It is the sequel, if you want to use that word, to the Wii U. So we already know that Nintendo's beginning their 9th generation console. Now, another question that sort of in my brain comes from that idea is, does one of the 3 console manufacturers moving into a new console generation, moving into their new generation, constitute a whole brand new console generation? And I want to say yes, but in the same respects, maybe not, because I feel like it also depends on how long Sony will carry on the PlayStation 4 brand, and Microsoft will carry on the Xbox One brand. So that may seem kind of weird and confusing at first, but the idea that I'm getting at is, if in 2017 Nintendo releases the Nintendo Switch, and then maybe the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One continue to go until 2019 or 2020 before the PlayStation 5 and Xbox 2 would end up coming out, it's like, I don't know if we can say that really, even with Nintendo's 9th generation console, that the whole console industry moved to the 9th generation in 2017, when 2/3, more than half of the console industry would have still been working within their 8th generation. And that's really hard to answer, you guys. I don't really know what we would do with that information if that happens. I mean, I would never deny that Nintendo's console is in fact their 9th generation machine, But really, the industry itself might still technically have to be considered operating within the 8th generation. Now, here's where Microsoft throws a whole freaking wacky ass wrench into this whole conversation. The Xbox Scorpio. And what's tricky is we don't really yet know what the Xbox Scorpio is. There's a lot of theories, there's a lot of talking and guessing. There's a couple of official pieces of information that we can glean from what Microsoft has said, and I tend to believe right now that it is going to be a different console than what the Xbox One is. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be an Xbox One SKU the way the PlayStation 4 Pro is a PlayStation 4 SKU. Oh my god, these freaking console names. I'm tongue twisting myself to death here, guys. Anyway, we don't yet know if the Xbox Scorpio basically is going to be the upgraded version of an Xbox One, or is it going to be Microsoft's 9th generation, next generation Xbox, their sequel, if you will, to the Xbox One, the same way the Switch will be the sequel and successor to the Wii U. So if the Xbox Scorpio, this is all in my opinion, by the way, if the Xbox Scorpio is in fact still an Xbox One, counts as an Xbox One the same way the DSi was still a DS, you know, the PlayStation 2 Slim was a PlayStation 2, the 360 Slim was a 360. If the Scorpio is still an Xbox One, then that, to me, tells me that we might be in a situation where Nintendo has started their 9th generation, but we might have to kind of look at the overall console generation as still the 8th, because I'm willing to bet that Scorpio is going to go another couple of years, and really my initial guess of 2019 or 2020, before Sony and Microsoft move on to their next consoles, if we go that long, I don't know if I can say that just because 1/3 of the console industry has moved to the 9th generation, that we're in the 9th generation of consoles. And this is, I'm realizing now, the weirdest conversation I could have possibly had. The way I'm dissecting 9th and 8th generation this and generation that, and air quotes this. What a crazy freaking mess. Anyway, bringing the conversation back in, there's another element that even confuses this a little bit more, believe it or not. Because let's say that in 2020, we get the PlayStation 5 and then the next Xbox, you know, beyond the Xbox One Scorpio, if that's what it's going to be at that time. What happens with the Nintendo Switch in 2020? Is this going to be a situation where Nintendo continues the Switch till 2023? And so all of a sudden, we are seriously dissecting the generations in a way that might not be able to be tracked anymore. This could be, the whole point of this conversation is where we are right now. We're on the precipice of potentially changing how and when and why we even change or look at console generations the way they are. And they might, in a different way than what Microsoft said a couple of months ago that I started screaming about, we might be kind of completely removing the walls of generations. And I don't really know if that'd be a good thing or a bad thing yet. I kind of like the way it's been. I like the structure every couple of years. The whole industry as a whole moves together into a new generation. I like that. But I really think we might be in a situation where that changes, and all of a sudden we have consoles staggering when they're going into what generation within their own sort of console, their own sort of machines and hardware, I should say. But that's tricky, because really the generations going, to years and generations past, they lined up around the 6th generation, with the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, the Xbox. That's kind of where they started lining up. But before that, they weren't really as consistent. When you look at the way things like the Dreamcast and the Saturn, the 32X, the PlayStation, the 64, the Jaguar, and the 3DO, all of these weird, some of them very obscure consoles that in the past have helped define what generation we were in, it's like those weren't really all coming out at the same time and creating these dividers between when Generation A starts and Generation B starts. It was only in the last few generations that they started to line up. So if we start to remove those walls and get to the point where everything is staggered, in a weird way, that would almost be going back to the way it was, in which case, maybe we still could go into 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th generation. Or maybe the whole thing is just going to be, like I said, thrown out the window, and all of a sudden we don't know what generations we're in, and everyone's just releasing consoles willy-nilly whenever it makes sense to. And will they ever line up again if that happens? Who knows? This whole thing is just a big guess and a speculation piece on my part. But it's just interesting because for the first time in, over 10 years, we're potentially looking at a scenario where we are going to change the way the console generations are separated and segregated based on when, Nintendo is going to be the one kicking this whole idea off. And so you have Nintendo you have Nintendo definitely releasing their 9th generation console, the Switch, in March 2017. When the Scorpio comes out at the end of the year, to me, that's going to be one of the biggest telling signs as to where this whole console generation idea is going to go. And like I said in the video, it's either going to be an Xbox One SKU or it's going to be their successor to the Xbox One and Microsoft's next generation Xbox, in which case we've got a Switch doing its own thing, we've got an Xbox doing its own thing, and the PlayStation 4 might actually be lagging behind. Unless Sony also ends up releasing another PlayStation by the end of 2017 or even in the beginning of 2018, and then holy frickin' shit, you guys, it's going to be game over. Apocalypse, it's going to be raining bombs all over the console generations, and all of a sudden, nothing is any generation, and every console is just every man for himself, and it is just going to be complete chaos. So anyway, in wrapping up this whole conversation, it should be noted that really none of this actually matters. So if you're watching this video thinking, what is he even talking about? Why? Maybe I don't really care what generation the Nintendo Switch is or the PlayStation 4 is. And you know what? To a huge degree, you're totally right, if in fact that's what you were thinking. I mean, I'm going to tell you guys right now, this doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. If Nintendo's console, whenever they release it, is great and it gives us the games we want, great. Doesn't really matter if it's the 9th generation or the Peapod generation or the Skippity-Doo generation. Like, it doesn't matter what we're calling the generations. Same with the Scorpio, same with the PS4 Pro, same with all that stuff. It doesn't really matter, but it has mattered in the past. And to be fair, we've all been living our gaming lives, some of us longer than others, you know, going back decades to the 8-bit and even the dot matrix days. You know, we've all been living our lives by how we are labeled within the generations. And generations, if anything, they're an excellent way to tell time. And they give you sort of a snapshot in history. And it's like, you know, in 15 or 20 years, when we say 7th generation or 8th generation, it's going to have a different meaning than it does right now. Because right now, those generations are fairly recent in our lives. But, you know, in 20 years, we can look back on today's consoles the same way we now look back on the NES and the Genesis and the Super Nintendo, with very fond memories and a clear-cut, very obvious way to define who was doing what at what time. That's the reason generations exist. That's the reason generations were applied to human life. That's where the whole term even comes from. A generation, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, is 25 years. That's what it actually means in human terms. So that's why, you know, a generation is your mom and your dad were one generation. We're a generation. Our kids are the next generation, because that 25 years is a great way to tell time and become sort of a time capsule as to what was happening and who belongs to where and what category. So there is relevancy even the way we've sort of adopted that idea into the video game industry. But like I said, at the end of the day, I'm just kind of rambling at this point about the whole concept of time. At the end of the day, this doesn't really matter, but it is interesting and it is unique. For the first time in, like I said, over 10 years, we could potentially be changing up how everything is defined, and Nintendo might be the ones kicking it off, which is pretty cool. I mean, really, Nintendo hasn't been able to claim something that unique in a long time, and I'll be glad for them if that's the case. I love the fact that Nintendo, right now, in my opinion, is the first one stepping into the next generation, the 9th generation with their Switch. Even if the Switch is less powerful than the PS4 and Xbox One, holy freaking crap, let's all cry about that. Even if so, it's the next generation. It is the 9th generation, just like the Wii U began the 8th generation. And that's pretty awesome, you guys. Even if they're jumping the gun by a couple of years and all of a sudden we're staggering when Nintendo releases their console and Sony and Microsoft release theirs, it's going to be interesting, man. It could be changing up the whole game and the way we look at all of our consoles and all that good stuff. But hey, like I said, as long as the games are great, who even cares, man? I'm excited. I can't wait for the Switch. I can't wait to see what Microsoft is doing with the Scorpio. Who knows when the PlayStation 5 is coming out? It's going to be really interesting to see it all play out over the next couple of years and generations. So that's it for today, guys. What do you think about the ideas that I laid out here today? What do you think about what Nintendo releasing the Switch in March could possibly mean for the generations? What do you think the Xbox Scorpio is truly going to be once it releases? And how will Sony catch up based on what they're doing with the PS4 Pro? Tell me your thoughts on all this wacky, chaotic stuff below. This was a really fun conversation, despite the fact that it may or may not be all that relevant and important. Tell me what you think. Thanks, of course, for tuning in, guys. This, as always, is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.